Well, good evening, everyone. If I could have your attention. So in a moment, we will have Jeremy Simmons and Bruce Henderson come up onto the stage, and they will introduce themselves, and they have some things to say about themselves. The one thing I wanted to share by way of introduction to tonight's topic on the history of the 150-year history of New Church Life is I was reflecting on this and thinking about my own career, and the memory I have of my pastoral visiting down in Florida. Throughout the state of Florida, I would travel around and visit individuals in their homes, and often, first time I wouldn't know who they were. I got the address and I got the name and the request for a pastoral visit, and you'd walk into the living room, and on the coffee table would be a copy of New Church Life. Okay, these are people that I am connected to, even though I don't know them. And that was the case down in Florida, that was the case in Michigan, and even overseas, with people, you go visit with people and you see on their coffee table or on the dining room table a copy of New Church Life. So I'm really looking forward to hearing these two young gentlemen, their story about New Church Life and its history and its future. Bruce and Jeremy, welcome.
Thanks, Derek. Yeah, thank you, Derek and Malcolm, for arranging this. Thank you for coming out on this awful night. Awful brave of you. I appreciate seeing you all here. And thank you to Jeremy ahead of time. Anything you see on a screen here is thanks to Jeremy. I was smart enough in getting a spiritual editor to get one who knew a little bit about technology, a lot more than I do, which is a low bar, but he did a very good job on all of this, the things that you'll see tonight. So we're going to talk a little bit tonight about the history of New Church Life. Now you look at this and you see 150 years of New Church Life, and then you see Jeremy and me. We haven't been doing it for 150 years. It may seem like that at times, but there's a very rich history, and it's fun to go back and read some of the old New Church Lives from 100 years ago. And occasionally we quote some things from old New Church Life, but it's a very important record of the church. So we're going to spend some time on history. Jeremy has a great slideshow to show you about that. Talk a little bit about what's new with New Church Life, what's changed in the last 15 years, and a little bit about what's next, which we don't know what's next either, but what the possibilities may be. At the end, there'll be a chance for questions and answers, comments, suggestions, anything you like. There are extra copies up here of New Church Life if you want to pick one up. And there are surveys at your table, which you're free to fill out. I'm going to give a little bit of an introduction, and Jeremy will too. I don't think either one of us needs to tell you too much about ourselves. Most of you know I had a long career in journalism. I was an editorial page editor for about 40 years, which meant I was writing editorials every day, which was a good discipline for what I'm doing now. I figured that I wrote something like 10,000 editorials in my life on anything you can think of, plus a column a week, and also restaurant reviews. And Carol's been trying to think of a way I can do restaurant reviews for New Church Life. Haven't quite figured that one. This is as close as we've come, sorry. So it was during my career in newspapers too. I also started writing books for the church. I always had this feeling that I wanted to do something to help spread the church. I did it somewhat in my writing when I had editorials for Christmas and Thanksgiving and Easter, and most editors don't like to write those, and I loved that opportunity. And I always had a little bit of New Church doctrine in there. People didn't know it, but they liked it, so that was encouraging. And I started writing the 3 books that I've done for the church while I was still in newspaper work. And when my dad was still alive, I asked him if he was disappointed that I hadn't gone into the ministry. And he said, what you're doing is a kind of a ministry. And I've always appreciated that and felt like, yeah, it is kind of a ministry what I'm doing, especially with New Church Life. So I feel very fortunate to have that privilege. So 1999, things were really starting to go south in the newspaper world. The internet was taking over. And I was ready for a change. So I thought, well, I was just about 60 years old then. I thought, I'll give 5 or 10 years to the church. And that'll be a good way to end my career. Now it's 27 years and still going, and I'm not even talking about retirement, so I'm loving it, loving the opportunity, and hope it lasts a good long time. Yeah, I think I'll turn it over to Jeremy now and let him give a little introduction, and we'll talk a little bit about the program, and then Jeremy will talk about history.
All righty,
Church
good.
life.
So when I graduated from theological school, my big goal was actually to become editor of New Church Life. And the main reason was because I figured I wouldn't have to talk in front of people. And I wanted to avoid talking, and I also wanted to avoid interacting with people. So I thought if I could just be in an office working on New Church Life, the ministry would be so much fun. Plus, Bruce's father, Karen's Henderson, I just thought he was a fabulous editor, and I would pore over this book as selected addresses, or whatever it's called, selected editorials. Every one of them was just brilliant. Anyway, also, I had kind of a newspaper background myself. I was editor of the Academian. And when I went to Penn, I was on the staff of the Daily Pennsylvanian, and I interviewed famous people like actor Paxton Whitehead, civil rights activist Julian Bond. I had a big article on the Morris Arboretum, and I covered the Army-Navy game. So I was famous in my day. Anyway, but now the real reason I'm here is because in the bylaws or in something, it says the editor of New Church Life has to be a minister. So that's me. Before me, it was Walter. I don't know what this guy is, but fortunately, he does all the work. Anyway, so today I'm going to just talk a little bit about New Church Life history and why I said 150 years, because 150 years ago, it was the 150th anniversary of it was the centennial. So this year, we're celebrating the 250th anniversary, and in 1876, Philadelphia hosted a huge centennial exhibition. And it was right there on the banks of the Schuylkill River, right where the zoo is now. And at the same time, because everybody was coming to the centennial convention, the convention had their convention there. It was held in Philadelphia. So all the ministers were there, including the founders of the Academy of the New Church. And the picture there is the picture of the 4 guys who met in Pittsburgh in 1874. And so this is 2 years later, and they got together with a bunch of their cronies who are listed there at the home of Dr. Felix Barracky at 222 Franklin Street, right across from Franklin Square, if you know where that is. And they signed their names to a document that had been circulated, the original wording of the Declaration of Principles. And this is really what the Academy Charter was. They are naming themselves the Academy of the New Jerusalem. Not the General Church yet, but the Academy of the New Jerusalem, to the end that we may be the better prepared to see the Lord's will in the interior revelations of his truth, and to cultivate and promulgate a knowledge of those divine revelations for the growth and development of the spiritual church. And they listed then 3 ends. 3. And they are preparation of young men for the priesthood, publication of the manuscripts, and in creating more publications for the church. So it was about the priesthood, about manuscripts, and about really collateral works. That's what the academy was all about. They never even mentioned education, even though they had a school running while this was going on. The education part was added in later as they applied for their charter, which was granted the next year. So they were all about documents, and so they created words for the new church. So this is the early form of new church life. 1877, they did these things to make an internal propaganda of the faith. So they were writing propaganda to distribute around convention to persuade them of academy principles, which are the Lord Jesus Christ is the one God of heaven and earth, and the writings are the second coming, and 2, that the Christian church has come to an end. Those are their main things. And they weren't very successful. But a couple years later, the young folks got together, the Young Folks Social Club of Philadelphia circulated a manuscript called the Social Monthly. And those young folks, they're a bunch of Starkies, I think, mainly. But in January 1881, they called it New Church Life. And this is what they said. It's to be a thoroughly and distinctively a new church paper designed to promote the culture of the young people in the doctrines and life of the church. I think it's so interesting that they called themselves young people. I think some of them were in their 30s. And finally, by bringing the young people together, it will become an ultimate of that bond of love. And I think this is very interesting because this was a big thing in those days, is how much genuine affection they felt for each other. They really wanted to get together. They really loved each other, and that's always an important thing. So here's one of, looking at some of the old things that they wrote, here's one that I thought was very amusing. So they had schools, and they had the academy schools. So Christmas at the academy, 1889. We had a service this year in celebration of Christmas for the first time. From this service, Santa Claus, the traditional saint of the Catholic Church, was banished. So apparently Santa Claus was normally present at Christmas things. And secondly, the heathen Christmas tree was also discarded because being a tree without roots, it is dead, comparing it to the dead church. So those are the good old days. Years later, they did come to accept the Christmas tree and Santa Claus. So meanwhile, Messenger, we have here, Bruce somehow got hold of these, copies of the Messengers from the 1800s. The Messenger was put out weekly and distributed all across the country. And it had very interesting things in it. But I'm just amazed at what kind of circulation it had. And these are ones from, this is the 1885, and we have some others.
It cost a nickel.
And it cost a nickel. And this one that you see up on the screen from 1891 just happens to be the one that has the article in it, the account of the General Church of Pennsylvania resigning from convention. So to the Reverend Chauncey Giles, I don't know if you can read this. The General Church of Pennsylvania, in view of the intolerable nature of its relations with the General Convention of the New Jerusalem, arising in part from a radically diverse understanding of certain fundamental doctrines, hereby declares the severance of its past connection with convention. And I mean, really pretty angry letter. This was written by good old Bishop Benaid. He was sort of severe. And interestingly, in this same issue, there's an advertisement for New Church Life. And it says, in order to give everyone an opportunity to judge of the merits of the important questions that are agitating in the church, in order that he may learn what the position of the academy of the new church is, come by these things and inform yourself. And this was written by Karl Asplund, that this hall is named after? Maybe not quite. But anyway, this is the Karl Asplund Hall. And there he is, looking just like an Asplund. Good-looking guy. Anyway, so that same year, the General Church, the Academy people, had a meeting at Cairnwood in 1891, which is a little strange, because does anybody here know when Cairnwood was built? 1895. So it says 1891, but nevertheless, the bishop called people together from the 20th to the 26th of June, 1891, and they voted to form themselves as the General Church. The use of the General Church is to evangelize the advent of the Lord, and this is their little constitution. General Church of the Advent of the Lord declares its purpose to proclaim and teach the everlasting gospel that the Lord Jesus Christ reigns, as that gospel is set forth in the books written by the Lord through his servant Emanuel Swedenborg. And so Mr. Jordan says in here, it has the briefest and the most comprehensive of constitutions. So this happened at Cairnwood in Bernathen in 1891, or rather in Huntington Valley. And you can see from this 1891 map that there we have Alnwick Grove. In 1878 is when the train started coming up to there. And we can see on this map, there is a bunch of land owned by Gertrude Pitcairn. And here's an enlargement of that same map, same thing. You can see, and that is the place where Bernathen would be. You might recognize the streams. You can see the Pennypack down at the left, Alnwick Grove. The road that runs straight up, I guess, is Alden Road or something. Anyway, there's the pike running down the middle. Kind of interesting. Now, another curious thing they did was they started counting the date in the years since the Second Coming. So New Church Life would say 1886 equals 116. And they did this generally. Like here is Walter and Edith Child's Christmas card. It would say in the year 1889 or 120. Or in this marriage invitation from Marie Jill Schill to being married to Henry Deering would be celebrated May 27th in the Hall of the Academy, 1826 North Street, Philadelphia, in 1890, also known as 120. Thought that was kind of interesting in New Church Life, but by 1900, they had given that up. Also, of great interest to me was that right from the first days of New Church Life, they were reporting interesting New Church news from other parts of the world. Like all these things are from Natal, South Africa, Cape Town, Mauritius, Nigeria even in 1902, and also in India, from stuff from Bombay, from Allahabad, from Bhavnagar, Professor Bhatt there, who hosted my own grandfather, Reverend F.E. Gyllenhaal, at the bottom line back then. So right from the start, New Church Life had things about a lot of other parts of the world, Japan, the Philippines, etc. An early controversy was Miss Beekman, who came to attention in Glenview. She'd written something about the first natural point, and she was quickly brought to Bernathen and taught in the theological school and caused division between the Actons and the Odeners. They haven't ever gotten along since. Now, in 1915 or so, Carl Theophilus Odener had a new format, which is a format familiar to a lot of us, and it was smaller and convenient to carry around in your back pocket. And that is a picture of my other grandfather, Samuel Simmons, and he was never to be seen without a copy of New Church Life, which he carried everywhere in his back pocket. Now, I can't really tell that that's what is there in his back pocket, but that's what the family said was there. Here is a picture of him on his wedding day to my grandmother, Gertrude Alden, who ran the preschool for years and years. Anyway. Okay, so we go through history and we get to World War I. There was a tremendous amount of feeling around World War I. It was a huge, huge deal. And I have read a lot of things about the rejoicing that happened when the armistice was signed. And this is Mrs. N.D. Pendleton's account of the way it happened in Bernathen. She says, the news of the signing of the armistice reached Bernathen about 1 o'clock on November 7th and spread like wildfire through the community. No one doubted its authenticity. We said it's too good to be true, but we believed it just the same. Believed in spite of ourselves. We wanted to laugh and cry, to dance and pray. With every passing moment, the tremendous import of the news grew. Now, this isn't a picture of the actual thing, but it's of, I think, 1920. The 1920 4th of July. A brief service in the chapel met the need of our overflowing hearts, and just as spontaneously, a procession, the like of which Bernathen had never witnessed, wound its triumphant way around the avenues, graybeards and little children, singing girls, cheering boys, everywhere waved the flags of the Allies and our beloved stars and stripes. And just as a river gathers volume on its journey to the sea, so the procession gathered numbers. There were mothers with shining eyes, the radiant faces of brave soldier wives and soldiers' babies, round-eyed with amazement at so much excitement on the part of their usually decorous elders. Everywhere were waving flags and joyous congratulations. And having circled Bernathen, the procession with one accord sought the unfinished cathedral, white and shining on the hill. It was as if in the epoch-making hour it had anticipated the future, and warm and living had called its children to its heart. No one who was present will ever forget that scene. A bevy of young girls had carried the Academy service flag to the porch over the west entrance. It hung across the balcony in the place of honor, a mute but eloquent reminder of the living and the dead. The American flag waved proudly overhead. The songs we sang, the words we said came spontaneously from full hearts. We celebrated the triumph of right and freedom after 4 despairing years. No wonder there are no words adequate to describe the joy and gratitude that we felt. And that evening, a celebration arranged by the Civic and Social Club was held. Songs, toasts, speeches, followed by a huge bonfire on the campus and a dance for the younger folks. That day has since been dubbed the rehearsal, but it was an experience impossible of repetition, which perhaps accounts for the fact that the actual day, November 11th, 4 days later, fell a bit flat. They didn't have radio. They didn't have the news. Okay, so meanwhile, they're building the cathedral, and it was written up quite a bit in New Church Life. The celebration of the 19th of June was signalized by a ceremony which was as grand as it was unique in the history of our church, the laying of the cornerstone of the temple or cathedral, which is now rising on a hill of beauty. And then, a few years later, the dedication, the beautiful cathedral in Bernathen was dedicated to the worship of the Lord Jesus Christ. The ritual associated therewith, and notice this wording, was as perfect as it was possible to make it. It will become more and more perfect as the church develops in intelligence and wisdom through regeneration and understands more fully the pattern of those things seen in the mountain. And this article goes on and on about how ritual in the general church is a living thing, and it grows and changes over the years, and very, very emotional. Prohibition came up quite a bit in New Church Life. Among those who have espoused the Academy principles, the prohibition or temperance movement has never been looked upon as the rational cure for the evils of intemperance. So the general church was not on board with intemperance, and a lot of people said so, and the practice in Bernathen kind of showed that. Then there was the Nova controversy. So we have this letter in the January number of New Church Life, 1931. There appeared a review of De Hemel Shalir, a magazine published by the Hague Society of the General Church, the most essential parts of which have been published in an English translation. As the above-mentioned review appeared in our site totally to misrepresent the spirit, the contents, and the purpose of De Hemel Shalir, we wish to add the following. This is Theo Pitcairn, and it caused quite a stir for years and years throughout the 30s. And it was quite well represented in New Church Life. Of course, we had World War II, lots of articles about World War II, about the good wars and bad wars. And there are probably people in this room who could name every single one of those men here, probably your parents or grandparents or somebody. This was taken in the spring of 1946 at the CNS Club. So there's one part. You could spend hours looking at this picture. Yeah, I can see my dad. I can see your dad. Maybe I can't see your dad, but anyway, it's very cool that they managed. These are about almost 70 men got together. It was just unbelievable how many veterans there were in Bernathen. Okay, now in a minute or so, I need to stop and we'll have a little break and come back to this. There is Benaid Hall. And after the war, there was a tremendous feeling of optimism in the church, optimism in the country. And you had articles, statements like this in New Church Life, talking about New Church education. The success and the continuance of the work that the founders commenced is a testification that it was and is a use in harmony with the divine order. Tremendous confidence about what we were doing. And similarly, here's an old faculty. You can probably recognize some of those old people. I think it's probably from the 1920s. But Dick Gladish wrote this, New Church Education. And today, the evidence confirms the 12th principle of the Academy, that experiment of New Church education as practiced under the Academy and the General Church has been successful in broad terms, but it's a limited success. We must not become complacent. Our education is evolving. In fact, it has only begun to evolve as a distinctive thing. So, all kinds of positive things. But in the 1970s, the tone changed somewhat as we began to focus more on evangelization. And here's what Frank Rose said in 1978. Think of the unfinished task. Think of the time, talent, money, and energy that we give to education. Now, imagine us giving even a tenth as much to evangelization. That would represent a budget of, and he talks about, if we do this, even a fraction of that amount would lead us to gain the competence and experience necessary for success. And throughout the 70s, 80s, 90s, and into the 21st century, we have continued to talk about evangelization. And while we haven't been that successful, it's a good thing. Okay, so I think I'm going to stop here before getting into let me just say this one more thing. The role of women started coming up quite a bit. Walter Orthwein saying this in 1979, the question of the relationships of men and women has always been a central topic of interest. And in 1982, Bob Youngie, in this hard and strained climate, we were asked as a church to inquire as to the role of women in our councils. In 1994, Mandy Steen saying, I have read with interest the ongoing commentary on gender-related language, encouragement to use more inclusive language. And finally, a big hurrah for having the wisdom to publish Mary Alden's well-thought-out questions regarding the role of women in the clergy and government of the church. So this was a big question that came up over and over again, really before the 1990s, but really was important then. So I stopped this section. I'm really almost at the end, but let me come back and say some more about these covers. And so we'll now have a little break. 15-minute break to get dessert. If you can take your desserts to your table, and I will drone on a minute or two and then turn it back over to Bruce. Because I just had to point out how cool these new covers are of New Church Life and how it evolved over the years. I don't know anything about who designed them or anything, but it was always this green ones that I grew up with, but then it changed red, then to that whitish color, and then another whitish color, and then they started putting, are you going to talk about how they started putting pictures on? Yeah, and then they started putting pictures in New Church Life occasionally. So here's a picture of Malcolm and Abby and some others. And here's a picture of Mauro de Padua when he passed away in 2011. And then in this next upcoming issue, there'll be pictures of Dan Goodnow, and look at him. Yeah, oh, they're so great. And just one change that's happening with New Church Life is, I always thought a very interesting part was this church news stuff. Rio de Janeiro, London, Chicago, Glenview, talking about how their Christmases went and who got married and what the weddings were like. And apparently at some point they couldn't get the societies to reliably report on this stuff, so they stopped doing it. Instead, now they have lifelines, and Bruce writes things that are more official announcements. Here's a picture of Walter, who really wanted to be here tonight, but he could not make it. And apparently, Walter was the one who originated the idea of lifelines. Right. So that's what we have nowadays. But we still have Bruce and Carol in charge. And isn't that a nice picture? Boy, they're good. Bruce really does everything. He's just a terrific editor and has been going on, hopefully, for another 15, 20 years.
Yeah, at least.
And another 15, 20 years. And we'll be good with that. So now I'm going to turn the program back over to him. That's my retrospective of 150 years of New Church Life.
Thanks, Jeremy. That was great. And you get a sense of the importance of history in New Church Life, that it is really a repository not only of the doctrine of the church, but the whole history of the church. And you can go back and read issues from 1881. And it's interesting, New Church Life started as a magazine for young people. And it was edited, I think, by young people and distributed to young people. And it was only, I think, in the beginning of the 1900s with maybe ND and WF Pendleton to need to be a little more serious and appeal to the wider part of the church. But it's got a great history. And it's fun to go back and read it. And you can do it online. There's a website in New Church Life that shows you how to do that. And you can also do it on Steve David's New Christian Bible Study. Has every issue going back to 1881. You just plug in the date and read the whole thing. It's fascinating. And I've gone back and used some things from history of Bishop Pendleton, Bishop DeCharms. And in 2011, I believe, I reprinted a commencement address that John Pitcairn had given 100 years before. And interestingly, his topic was progress. And his message was that they'd seen more progress in the last 100 years than any time in history. And you think since then, the amount of progress that we've seen just puts that to shame. But his message was that we're making all this material progress, but are we progressing spiritually? And of course, that's even more an insistent question now. So I want to go back a little bit too to how I got started in New Church Life. And I was working in the development office and doing communications for General Church and the Academy. And you may remember the publications we had for Lion's Pride and Around the New Church that appeared every other month. And then we got into budget problems, and they had to cancel that. And well, I'd done my 10 years then for the church. That was it. And I'm glad Tom Klein is here, because he's the one to blame for getting me into New Church Life. And thank you, Tom. And we got around that business of requiring, it's the ordered organization of the General Church that says the editor of New Church Life must be a minister, not should be, but must be. And the idea was the editor has kind of a pastoral relationship with the whole church, so it had to be a minister. So we got around that by having what we call a spiritual editor. And Walter Orthwein did that for the first 9 or 10 years, did a wonderful job. And as Jeremy said, he was the one who had the idea for Lifelines. There was a magazine he liked, and I forget what it was, but it had these little segments in there. And he thought we could do that, and I thought, that's great, because I'd been writing columns for years. So it's one of my favorite things to do. I wanted to say a little bit about my dad, too, because, of course, neither one of us had any idea I would ever be editor of New Church Life. And I feel so humbled and privileged to be following in his footsteps as the only father-son team who's done this. And Jerry mentioned the book Selected Editorials, which are just a marvelous collection. Those editorials are every bit as relevant today as when they were written 50, 60 years ago. Just a wonderful thing. One of my prized possessions that I got from my dad, and this was given to him by a theological school class, I think it was Don Rose, at least to me it sounds like a Don Rose kind of thing to do, was the rubber stamp that says heresy. And I don't think it's ever been used. It's a red stamp. And I don't want to give it to Jeremy, because he would probably stamp my editorials with heresy all over. But it's a fun thing to have from his days as editor of New Church Life. Jeremy talked a bit about the evolution of the covers. I don't think there's anyone here old enough to remember when they were yellow. I think they were yellow for 50 or 60 years or so. And my father made the bold decision to turn them green. And then they went through these different evolutions. And when I was taking over, we did a survey, and you have a sort of a copy of that survey to fill out tonight. But we were trying to figure out what people were really looking for in New Church Life, what changes did they want. We were, and then partly for economic reasons, going to bi-monthly publication, raising the price, adding new features and so on. So we wanted to get some guidance on that. And so, yeah, so I wanted to mention about the new cover, which you saw up there, which has a very modern design. And that was designed by Serena Silverman Sutton, who did the formatting for New Church Life for me for about 8 years till she got too busy in the college. And that's a very important job. Michelle Chapin did it after Serena, and now a girl named Tess Brown Taylor in Kempton does it. You got to have a real background in graphics and so on to do it. So it's an important step, and I'm very grateful for that. And I should mention we have a wonderful team of people that put out New Church Life. It isn't just Jeremy and me doing it. There's a team behind the scenes that does a lot of work. Besides the formatting, we have 3 proofreaders. Nolene Rose, who's been doing it from the time I took over, and she's just wonderful. Elaine York and Don Fitzpatrick. And in the past, we had Gwen Oswald and Judy Hyatt and Katie Gerwitz. And it's interesting with proofreading, you always think it's easy to do proofreading, but it's so easy for your eyes to trick you, and they tell you that something's correct and it really isn't. And every issue, I find that there are things that one proofreader finds that the others missed. And I send out the stuff, and I think it's all perfect, and they find all these errors in there. So it's an important job. And I tell the story about a Fortune 500 company years ago that determined that they were going to put out an annual report with no errors, and they hired absolutely the best editors, proofreaders, spent a lot of money on this, put it out to the public, and the first sentence had an error in it that everybody had missed. So we try, but One of the things with, Jeremy mentioned church news, and we had to discontinue around the new church. I wanted to have a little more church news in New Church Life, so we have expanded that. I get most of the newsletters from around the church, and I try to get stuff out of there or encourage things. One thing I'll say too, there's tremendous variety in our church newsletters. You see them all together, you would never know they were all in the same church. And one of my favorites of all is the one that comes out of England. And it's a very small church there, and it comes out once a month, but it's just a wonderful publication. And you'll see I often have things from Grant Odner that I've borrowed from there, or Eric Buss when he was there. They do a wonderful job. So we steal from anybody. We get whatever material we can. I want to ask you a question. I want you to be honest and put up your hand. How many people start reading New Church Life from the back? All the announcements, the births, the deaths. It's also known as the hatched, matched, and dispatched, I've heard. It used to bother my father that people started at the back, but that's the interesting part where it is. Two things I've noticed about the announcements. One of them I think is kind of humorous. The other is a concern. The humorous part is that you probably notice that at times we have loads of baptisms from Africa. Brad Heinrichs or someone will go over there and do 30 baptisms. So we always have these baptisms from all over Africa, but we never have any deaths from Africa. I don't know if they don't die or they don't report their deaths. We just get births all the time. The other thing in there that sort of concerns me as a trend with baptisms and confirmations and betrothals. Last year, and this is always in part of the index, or at the end of the December issue, we had 106 baptisms, 2 betrothals, and 3 confirmations. If you go back 50 years, it was 169 baptisms, 36 betrothals, and 42 confirmations. 75 years, 153 baptisms, 40 confirmations. It was interesting when I was looking that up. There were no betrothals listed in New Church Life until 1969. I have no idea why they didn't. And all of a sudden in 1969, 1 betrothal appeared. In the next issue, there were 2, and no explanation. I'd love to be able to go back to my dad and say, why did this happen? Why were there no betrothals all these years? And now it's a natural part of the reporting. When we had 3 bishops a few years ago, we started a new feature called From the Bishop's Office. And I would give them an opportunity to communicate with the church, each one twice a year. And I encourage them to report on what they're doing in their various areas like evangelization and education and so on. Sometimes they do that. Sometimes they just write what they want to write, and they're free to do that. But I think it's important to have that. News from the bishop's office. We do a lot of variety. Besides sermons and doctrinal papers, we have commencement addresses, Charter Day addresses. We really encourage contributions from laymen and women, and I'm really happy when we have those. We try to do as much variety and trying to appeal to all ages as much as we can. I mentioned the team in the announcement. I should mention Anita Haldeman, too, who's the secretary of the General Church. And she is the one who prepares all the announcements as well as an annual report. And I don't know how she does it, because I see some of these reports that come in from the ministers, and they're all handwritten. And a lot of them write like doctors. I don't know how they decipher. We have enough strange names coming out of Africa as it is, but she figures them all out. And she and Nolene put that together every issue and do a wonderful job. So, Jeremy, did you want to talk some more about what's next? Okay. I don't know if we're going to take another break or should we keep going for a little while? Okay, let's keep it going. We're talking about what's next, and it's a good question. I don't know who's going to be the next editor. I have no idea. And as far as I know, it's not going to happen for a while. I mean, I'm 87 now, and I'm still happy to go to work every day. I think Carol's happy to have me go to work every day. I keep her in her lifestyle, which she likes. But I love what I'm doing. I've been fortunate my whole life. I don't think I ever had a day where I didn't look forward to going to work. Being able to write about what's going on in the world, on in the church, it's just a great opportunity. So I really feel privileged to be doing this job, and hope it can keep going. What technology is going to do to New Church Life, you have no idea. We were just chatting about AI and the things it can do and things that are a little scary. Some of you may remember a year or so ago, I was sitting with someone and we were talking about AI, and I said, do you think AI could do an editorial for New Church Life? And she said, well, let's see, give me a topic. So I said, how about the history and the future of New Church education? So she plugged this into chatbot, and in a minute and a half out came this long editorial citing New Church Life and parts of the writings, and it was just amazing. And then she said, well, let's try to do it for young people, put it in more of a young person's language. So we did, and that took another minute and a half. And then she said, well, let's do it as a poem. So then a poem came out, all with doctrine. It's just mind-boggling. So it's amazing what it can do, and it's a little scary. I hope we don't have ministers using it to write sermons. I'm not going to use it to write editorials. I think it's going to be a great tool for research, and obviously it's got a lot of good things it can do, and things that we have to be careful about. One of the things that may help us about, and I think as a church we need to be thinking about, is foreign languages. We have a lot of churches all over the world now, in Korea and Africa and Europe, and we send out everything in English, and I think within a few years we'll be doing that in their languages, and it's getting easier and easier to do that. Those of you who use Steve David's website, New Christian Bible Study, it's amazing how many translations he has. You just push a button and you can get it in French or Chinese or Korean or whatever. And I think we owe it to a growing church to be able to do that. As I said, it's important to keep New Church Life going just for the history of the church. And it's amazing when you go back, and Jeremy was giving a flavor of the history that's reflected throughout the pages of New Church Life. And that doesn't happen anywhere else. And sometimes I'm nagging our ministers and our bishops that it's important to get this news. From the General Church Board, the Academy Board, there's nowhere else that gets reported to the church. And so just as a record or depository, it's important to have that. And so I'm grateful for that aspect of New Church Life. Well, thank you all for coming out tonight. I appreciate your attention. I appreciate you as readers of supporters of New Church Life. You're part of this great history, so
That's right.
You're important to us. Thank you.
Fill out the survey.
Yes.
Boxes out front.
Yes. Thank you very much, Bruce and Jeremy. That was fascinating. We have more refreshments. You don't need to rush off, but maybe you do need to go. And these guys are still around if you have questions you'd like to ask them in person. And if you still have even more time, we would not frown at you offering to help put some of the chairs and things like that away. So we'll be looking to Tom straight away. He'll be helping us. And the society meeting next Wednesday, this coming Wednesday. And we've got, is that spare copies of New Church Life? Spare copies. Free. All right, thanks everyone. Great to see you. Thank you.